How do we start to shift the current structure of economy and sort of material production? And a lot of that's going to look like replacement of existing technologies and working within existing market structures. And I see, a whole lot of really strong conventional players arguing against, the proliferation of plastics. And I look at a lot of the liabilities just in performance of those materials from a moisture standpoint or a fire standpoint, a durability standpoint, like plant-based alternatives to that, like we can roll those out like yesterday and are actually rolling those out in real time. So when we're looking at some of those opportunities from an investment standpoint, like we could start right there and do like a phenomenal amount of good in terms of how those investment dollars are both mitigating the harms in the built environment and maximizing the opportunities in the agricultural sector. Like it's a total win-win without having to like dismantle capitalism.
Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast, a show about human environments and how they can be used as a force for good. Conversations that educate and inspire people looking for a different way to do real estate. I'm Neil Collins, and on this episode, I'm joined by Jacob Deva Racusin, a natural building designer, builder, and educator, and the co-founder of the company New Frameworks. It was an early guest on this show named Jake Fry who turned me onto natural building. It's funny because Jake designs these unbelievably cool stick-built laneway houses. But he mentioned one of his favorite books was a title written by Lloyd Kahn named Builders of the Pacific Coast. This book fascinated me as it features builders who handcrafted the most gorgeous homes out of driftwood and created sanctuaries from natural materials like straw, cob, and clay. From there, I began to seek out natural building projects and was captivated by earth ships, timber framing, straw bale, and cob homes. By and large, though, I would say that these projects were initiated by people disenchanted by society at large, who sought ways to create more affordable, healthy habitat with the benefit of incorporating artistic, personalized flair. I saw this more as an art form than an approach for the mainstream building industry. On the other end of the spectrum, I have equally been moved by high-performance buildings. These are the passive houses and the living building challenges. We even had a requirement early on for our team members at Latitude to get Living Future accreditation to learn about the most advanced green building certification out there. These buildings are like high-performance sports cars with fancy bells and whistles and the latest and greatest technology to achieve net zero results. Meanwhile, I found natural buildings more akin to bicycles, an enduring and classic technology. But as I get into it with Jacob, what impressed me is that these worlds seem to be colliding. And chances are, if you pick up a natural building book that's been written recently, you'll find the pages chock full of performance data that shows that natural building techniques can produce some of the healthiest, most energy efficient, and beautiful structures that are being built on the planet. What intrigued me about their work at New Frameworks is how they are iterating their building practices so that natural buildings don't have to just be at the fringes of the building industry, but can be legitimate solutions to create homes, apartments, and other structures that can compete with production builders. This field of high-performance natural building is one that I suggest you pay particular attention to and hope that anyone that wants to do a project using these techniques reach out to us, as these kinds of projects really light us up. Not only do I hold tremendous hope for the high-performance aspect of the homes, but I see it as a way in which we can begin to integrate regenerative agriculture with the built environment to create truly sustainable, closed-loop homes that we can feel good about raising our families in and aid in regenerating farmland. Now, if this episode resonates with you or you have a suggestion about future episodes, then I encourage you to leave a rating and review, join us on the Regenerative Real Estate Facebook group, or send us an email at team@chooselatitude.com. We would love to hear from you. Jacob, it's a pleasure to have you come on. One of the things that I wanted to start off with is there's a thread of your story that I wanted to pick up because it sounds really parallel to mine, around sustainable agriculture and around food. And I know that you're in Vermont, and I want to get a picture into that early life of why food, why agriculture. You're doing something very different right now. I mean, not extremely different. There's a relationship there, but let's pick it up with that.
I love it. I was way into food before I was into building. And so the real origins, we'll start kind of at the beginning. I was really into like political punk music in my high school years. Like that was my like musical kind of roots. And so through that world, I started working with Food Not Bombs and sort of dishing out meals in Burlington and various other communities in Vermont. And that led me into a really strong interest around sort of food justice and food access. And growing up in Vermont, where we're really agricultural and have a really strong food economy and values around food systems, I started then volunteering with NOFA Vermont. This was in the early ages before the federal organic program. So NOFA was still like a regional, kind of more of a scrappy organization that was really focusing on sort of regional food sovereignty and sustainability. And rural Vermont and a couple of other like agricultural advocacy organizations. They got really into sustainable ag in the Northeast in the 90s. And so that was an early focus for me and led me to really be interested in sustainable agriculture and organic agriculture and learning some of the like practical physical skills around that work. I grew up as a kind of a nerdy performing arts kid. And so I didn't really have a whole lot of like, hands-on skills growing up around, connection to soil and connection to making things and more of those practical skills. So I got really into organic agriculture. And so, I started working actually in an organic seed company. It was one of my very first jobs, High Mowing Seeds. And I spent years working there while I was in the process of sort of building my own home and kind of getting into the building realm.
And so what brought you into wanting to build your own home? Like why the shift from high mowing into building with your hands?
Yeah, it wasn't actually my intention to get into building. So I started as an owner builder. Rather than going to college, we bought an abandoned homestead, abandoned farm in the mountains of northern Vermont. My partner and I were both, she came from a organic agricultural field. She'd been working in organic ag for years, and we were both really focused on developing a homestead and farmstead. And for me, the practice of building a home was very much along the same lines of just developing those hard skills, being able to build something of a higher quality than what we'd be able to afford on the market, and being able to develop our sort of built infrastructure and is with the same sustainable ethics that we were coming about our food and agricultural systems. And so it really wasn't until about halfway through the building process that I realized that I actually really enjoyed it and loved it and sort of started following that path more formally. And then it just took off and became the path for me. Yeah.
When did you first learn about natural building, Jacob?
So I first learned about natural building, it must have been the late 90s amongst many jobs. And this was actually prior to working at the seed company. I had a job working for a small home business that was in a straw bale home in one of the first straw bale buildings in New England in the Ten Stones community in Charlotte, Vermont. And so I was working in that home and I completely fell in love with the home. The building itself was just gorgeous. And it performed incredibly, it was incredibly comfortable. It was a very efficient and comfortable home to be in, and learned more from them about the nature of building with straw and kind of what their experience was and how that went. And it just aligned really closely with a lot of my goals and values around construction. So I started getting really into straw bale construction kind of from that experience. My first forays formally were through the Yes Tomorrow Design Build School, where I took some of their home design build courses and an early straw bale course that they were offering. And so those are my first real like direct entry points as like I guess it's around 2021, kind of getting exposed, not just to natural building, but sort of residential design and construction writ large. And then really, once I started building my own straw bale, so my home is a straw bale home. I did the very, sort of classic homestead process of, cutting down my own trees and, gathering manure from the neighboring farm to make the plaster and just the whole gestalt of it. And it was a wonderful experience, and realized that there was a real need for combining straw bale architecture and design and natural building technologies in general with a more regional response for what it was like to build in cold, wet New England. And that I saw that there was work to do there, and I had a really keen interest in it. And so that led to more conversations and connections within the natural building community in our region. And then it just sort of snowballed from there.
Yeah, let's pick up on that thread. I'm curious around how that comes together. It seems like you need an ecosystem of other people that can complement that. But what was the process like to hang a shingle? I guess were you a general contractor, design, build? What was really that first application of doing that as a business?
Yeah. So my very first job was working as a plaster contractor for a dear friend, Ben Graham, he was recently out of design school and had his own design build practice, essentially designing and building custom single family buildings, residential construction. And there are not that many of us doing this work in that region at the time. So we sort of knew each other. I actually had hired him to do some consulting when I was designing and building out my place. And then once he saw that I had a good handle on it and I was really interested in it, he hired me as a plaster contractor for one of his build projects. That was the first job. And then there was kind of a community of us that were all trying to do that type of work: natural building enclosure systems, timber frames, earthen floors, that, sort of plying our trades sort of as small individuals. When Ace McCarlton, who is one of the co-founders of New Frameworks, founded the company in 2006, we've been sort of hiring each other on each other's projects. And I ended up joining up with Ace and New Frameworks. And then that company built out primarily as a natural building company. We were really focusing on the sort of applied trades in timber framing, straw wall construction, straw clay and wood chip clay wall systems, earth and lime plastering, earthen floors, green remodeling in the winters, that kind of a thing. And that was our business model for quite a number of years, until Ben ended up joining us around 5-7 years later. And that's when we became a full design build company and started our in-house design part of the company. It was around the same time that we also started doing after the recession, I got my BPI certification. We started working in existing buildings because we were not hitting either our social or our ecological mandates, just doing new custom construction. So the recession gave us an opportunity to kind of change things up a bit, and we started doing weatherization and home energy work around that same time. And that part of our company has grown and is sort of runs as part of our overall offerings as well. So started natural building, sort of small buildings, and then kind of scaled up from there.
Mm-hmm. I want to continue to go into that path. So the early days of your green building career and natural building, who is that customer base that's seeking that guild out to build custom natural homes for them?
Yeah, we had two primary customers. We had folks of, relatively comfortable means that were able to fund a custom new project for the most part, without the need for bank loans, although we did have a few folks that ran through conventional construction loans. They're just a little bit more complicated. And those are folks that were really mission driven around either their eco-sensitivity or their health sensitivity. And sometimes those overlap. So we had some folks that were like really focused on healthy materials and healthy environmental spaces. And some folks that were really focused on like a connection to the land and a connection to place and light on the earth kind of housing. So those are our two. That was kind of like one market. There's sort of two subsets. The others were folks of lesser means that couldn't afford a full design build project, but were more taking an owner builder route, but needed support. And they either needed support in like some of the technical application, or they needed to hire in a crew for getting over certain humps, or so some combination of that. So we did a lot of owner builder support and owner builder consultation work kind of around that whole same era.
Oh, interesting. And let me test an assumption on you, Jacob.
Yeah.
The custom home builders that I know go through some pretty significant brain damage, I would say by nature of the business model, and I'm not saying that everybody is just challenging, but it is notorious for being a really challenging spot. And is that any different if you're working with natural building materials?
I would say it's a lot harder because we also found ourselves essentially being manufacturers at the same time as builders. So we're having to source straw, source clay, custom mix plasters appropriate to the context that we're building in. There's all of that demand in the process on top of the actual construction process and the project management and everything that comes along with conventional construction. So yeah, it was tough, really heavy lifts. To counterbalance that, the customers we had were amazing. I would say they very much fall into like the camp of true believers. Like they were doing this because they believed in it, and they were willing to have things take a little bit longer. In some cases, invest more money, although it's never really been like a major cost driver to build custom natural. I think mostly it's just not as profitable of a business model, but they were really willing to go to bat for a much more unique and kind of custom process. And so that kind of counterbalanced some of the stress and difficulty of custom construction. Although, I mean, you make a really astute point. I mean, we were expecting, so I got my early training at Yes Tomorrow and then started teaching through Yes Tomorrow, teaching the natural building certificate program there starting in 2005, 2006. And then, Ace joined me in that work as well. And we were really focused on workforce development and really trying to build out a much broader population of tradesfolk familiar with these skills in our region. And I will say, coming out of the recession, it was hard to find anyone interested in doing carpentry, period, let alone like psyched to get into like natural building technology. So that ended up not being a really successful model because, I mean, to your point, it was hard to find folks getting into the trades at all, let alone something that was like weird and hard and specific. And so that was a huge part of what sort of led to our current process of prefabricated panelized straw is a direct outcome of some of the challenges and difficulties of sort of scaling up the trades in general, and in particular natural building technologies, and in particular natural building technologies in a cold, wet climate where the site conditions are way less forgiving and the pressures and demands on the building are much higher than in a drier or more temperate climate.
There's a couple different paths that we can take here, but let me go into an observation to see if I'm right. But doing research on new frameworks and really looking at the culmination of your work, Jacob, it seems like you've naturally gravitated towards building performance and being forward about the metrics of this is what this technology is, and here's data. Was that intentional, or am I completely off base here?
No, 100%. Yeah, no, you were bang on from the very, very get-go, like literally from my own house. It was a very like forward objective to understand how to adapt architectural and technological styles that were more like fully matured in the desert Southwest, and to figure out how they could best be applied in the cold Northeast. And I knew heading into it that I was not going to just be able to take a building that was built in New Mexico and plop it down in Vermont and expect it to work. I didn't know a whole lot about building, but I at least knew that much.
You're not doing earthships in Vermont?
No earthships, no rammed earth, no Adobe, not for enclosure walls anyways. Yeah, I mean, those are some of those things like I knew just, yeah, again, even as a semi-illiterate younger person, that this needs to work well here. And so I had the benefit of learning from Paul Lisinski, who was a builder. He was not in the trades for very long, but he was really pivotal in bringing some like adaptation and evolution of the kind of like 80s era and early 90s era straw bale details to the Northeast. He was one of my early teachers at Yes Tomorrow. And so that he like really pointed us in the right direction around, hey, this matters. We need to really think about this. And so, in my house, I sort of pioneered some of the early techniques of trying to get airtight, durable connections between plaster and timbered systems. I will not say they worked tremendously well. I learned a lot living in my own house and hooking up blower doors and seeing what worked and what didn't work. But right from the get-go, we were really paying attention to that stuff. And then that just amplified through teaching at Yestermar. It was one of the most valuable things of being able to come of age as a professional while having like an educational track in addition to the contracting track. You learn so much by teaching. And I also learned a tremendous amount from my students, some of whom were way more professionally established than I was in their own fields. I would ask a bunch of really probing questions, like talk to me about airtightness and what does thermal continuity look like, and some of these pieces that really helped me sort of evolve our detailing and evolve my own thinking around what the potential for the material could be. We wrote a book, The Natural Building Companion, and in the process of writing that, we had this like, oh my God, we're about to put out all these details into the world that like we really need to stand behind and make sure that they're valid and that they really work. And so we hired this terrific building analyst, Brad Cook, to look at 7 buildings that we had built and hook up blower doors and IR camera scans, that's infrared thermography scans, and a whole bunch of moisture testing. And that was formally in preparation for the book, but by extension became an evolution of our best practices of how to really build high performance construction in New England using these materials. It was the same time I got my certified passive house training. I think that was 2012, somewhere around that era. And again, that was like a huge influence in the potential of what high performance building and design could be. And from our sort of practical experience in working with straw construction, we're like, oh, these things totally connect. Plaster is an amazing air barrier system, and straw, the way we've been building it, is an inherently a thermally continuous high performance insulation. Like this can work. We can do this. So yeah, that's the roots there.
That's interesting. So you mentioned Passive House. I think I was listening to a Passive House podcast that you were on, and you're specific whenever you use this language around natural building technologies, which I think is amazing. And he's like, yeah, but it's not really a technology. And you really push back on that. And you're like demonstrating like there's high performance methodology and technology built into this. And I'm curious around the relationship that natural building has with Passive House, where you can get extremely airtight but highly toxic Passive House homes. And no offense to the Passive House movement. I think it's amazing. But I want to know more about that relationship as you see it.
Yeah, I think there is a ever-growing ellipsis at the center of the Venn diagram between natural building, the world of natural building, the world of passive house, and by extension, high-performance kind of building science forward construction. As I was just stating, I've always stood at the center of that ellipsis. They've always seemed corollary and that they really unify. I'm going to use a whole bunch of generalizations here. So I'm going to be sweeping entire communities with very broad brushes in some of the descriptions I'm going to make and trying just to like illustrate some of the distinctions and differences between these communities. Again, I think they're growing closer and closer all the time, particularly at the era where I first got my passive house training. The movement was explicitly focused on building energy performance. I mean, that is really the core metric of passive house. It's an energy standard. And so by design, that standard is agnostic around materials. And to their credit, they are looking for the most durable, functional, and efficient way of building to this really, really high level of thermal performance. So it's never been about the materials per se and holding metrics around material composition or impact or performance. It's been the materials in service towards achieving an energy standard, an energy performance level for the building. And so to that end, a lot of criticism we get would be, oh, we're over focusing on the materiality, and particularly when and if it would come at the expense of building performance, which is a valid critique, because on the other side, the natural building world tended to be, very material forward. Like you were doing entire building design and the entire partie of your whole building is based around the composition of your wall materials or your floor materials or what have you. Like that's pretty material forward. And there's a beautiful, sort of practice and theory, really praxis of relationship with place and relationship with materials and the process itself holding value. And that, I mean, that was a huge part of what attracted me, particularly coming from an agricultural basis and having this like relationship with the land and understanding my food comes from a place, and that really matters. And the process of that and sort of the equity around that system really matters. Like you can just extend that directly towards building, and there's boom, there's your natural building movement. That said, the natural building movement, particularly the movement that I came out of, tend to be a little more sort of suspicious of / reticent to embrace technologies like mechanical ventilation systems. I can't tell you how many arguments I've had with fellow natural builders around the value of mechanical ventilation. And a lot of that community was not just rooted in materiality, but in a DIY, owner built kind of sort of proletarian ethos around how we all have an inherent human right to access the shelter and being able to provide ourselves shelter. And there's a very strong social mandate around that movement, and a very like strong kind of, independent streak around sort of democratizing housing out of the professional class to be accessible to everybody. And I still believe in that. I think I'm an owner builder. Like I came of that movement and from access to building technologies that were not rarefied and, required a decade's worth of experience. That said, when you have buildings coming out of that community, they tend to be buildings that are of the performance level of people that haven't built things before, or maybe built a couple of things, or share their information, in the early versions of the internet and, printed trade magazines and things like that. So, not exactly orienting itself towards high performance construction. And particularly when that movement's coming out of maybe gentler climates like Southern California, rather than the Northeast, where like, nope, you cannot get away with some of those same details and consider it okay. So there's a rigor and a professionalism that was missing, I think, from a lot of applications of these natural building technologies based on the social movement that kind of birthed it, which there is some inherent tension and conflict there. And I still see it in the natural building community today. I find that type of tension to be healthy. I think it keeps the technologists a little more grounded in the fact that that technology needs to be accessible to everybody. And I think it keeps the sort of the owner builder folks maybe a little more honest around the fact that, some of these technologies are actually important, and the health and ecological and energy outcomes of the buildings matter every bit as much as the fact that, like, yes, it stands and you can sleep in it. And so, the melding of those two communities, that's what I'm seeing right now in this, like, huge interest in materiality within the high performance building community. And it's coming very much from the same two value propositions that we saw in our early market. We see people that are really concerned about indoor air quality and creating healthy buildings. And there's like, there's whole labeling systems and data transparency systems and, lead points and all the things built around toxicity and health. And similarly around material impact, and the fact that embodied carbon has become as big of a focus and as well understood of a concept as it is, let alone the other sort of components of toxicity like, plastic proliferation, and trying, to find, the fact that circular economy is a concept that people are talking about. Like, oh my God, that's amazing. We've arrived, or are arriving, I should say. And so I see the valuation of materials and the story of materials and where they come from and where they end up being woven into the sort of the priorities or the value proposition behind high performance building as very much like growing that ellipsis. And then similarly, I'm seeing more and more people that are like an old school natural building people getting incredibly literate around energy performance and just the craft and the quality of their building execution to be able to achieve those outcomes. Like they're growing towards each other on both sides, which is beautiful and wonderful because it's really all parts of a whole of what it means to do good building in the world.
I love that. And I think to give credit to the people that tune into the show, that tension that you talk about is multidimensional. It comes from so many different places of, we're sitting in an industry that is the commodification of land and home and place while we're trying to create whole communities. But you're hitting upon the energy side as well as the health side. And that's really where I get lit up, because the more science that goes into understanding the health implications. And whenever you talk about natural building technology, I was pretty ignorant around what that technology is, and through the discovery process of what does it mean to, I don't know, thermoregulate from the insulation, natural insulation in the walls, or to like ions and grounding effects. And we've had a great learning relationship with Paula Baker Lepore and her husband Robert around EcoNest homes, and to like go in and experience what that really looks like is incredible. And I see you guys with new frameworks on the East Coast as just being this like amazing beacon of putting out information into the world, and to see the energy side, which for whatever reason, because federal or state or local policies seem to start there from a top-down approach, rather than like you should have earth and floors because you need to ground and all these other things. Like we're not seeing that, right? We're seeing top-down energy, life cycle assessments, certainly more coming out of Europe, but it seems like we're moving in that direction. And that leads me into my next question, Jacob, is like, what do we need to go from this custom home market, people that really care about either the impact on the planet or the impact on their health? How do we move that? Is the goal to move that more into production of where this like conventional building industry is? Is it a top-down approach through policy? Is it bottom-up through awareness? Like what do you think if things were to go right, what would that look like?
Yeah, great question. I think the answer is yes, all of them. And I see that, happening in all these different levels. I mean, I'm seeing the evolution within our practice, within our company, and certainly just within myself around orienting around the need to scale. And for a really long time, we were just trying to get it right and prove concept and prove viability, both as a technology and buildings that could endure and last and perform as well as we say, and be durable and be market viable and have a company that can survive in the marketplace while doing this, yep, we can do this and it's working. And now there is just such a rapid uptick and interest in what we're offering, largely in response to crisis. Climate crisis, housing crisis, biodiversity crisis. It's compelling everyone from like individual consumers to industry players to policymakers, like, oh my God, we need responses to this, particularly when we're seeing how much responsibility the built environment holds for a lot of these social and ecological harms that we're working within. I think you framed it really well, in the preamble to the question, that like the inherent tensions in an industry that are commodifying, land use and housing, that process of commodification tends to externalize the vast majority of those impacts. They're outside the very small, rigid system boundary of, dollars per square foot or like a time scale for development or whatnot. And I don't know anyone that I know very few people that literally do not care about the social or ecological impacts of construction. The ones that really don't care, not my market. Almost everyone I've ever met cares. The question is can the benefits that come from a high performance natural building fit within that narrow system boundary of the pro forma for the development plan? And it's not that they don't want those things or they don't see the value or they don't even maybe see some of the direct hard costs that they would, so the reduction in hard costs through operations, but it just doesn't necessarily fit on the capitalization budget. And so, it's like having to work within the systems and structures that we're in means a lot more creativity around how we move and shift the market to bring some of those externalities into the fold. And so I see that drive happening kind of on every level. I think there's very much a market drive. And I think that market drive is maybe the most direct and tangible in the low-rise residential sector, where you have a single homeowner that's willing to pay a small premium or take an extra, chunk of months in the development time to find the right product or whatever that extra bit of effort is. You're just convincing a single homeowner in a relatively small scale project. That's a pretty direct path from a market drive into changing technology within a given project. I think that scales up. There have definitely been some leaders in the real estate development space that are, we already see that in the passive house realm where they're like, yep, this works, this makes sense. We're doing this, and it pencils out, particularly for long tenure clients that are going to see the benefits of reduced operational costs and increased building durability. That's already happening. And I think on the material side, it's just that much easier for folks in that leadership space to kind of weave some of that in as well, for a minor cost premium. And honestly, a lot of these things can be cost cost parity or cost negligible. It just takes a little bit of work to figure out what those materials are and what the combination of technologies are that keep the cost balanced. On the industry side, I think there is a rapidly growing niche industry that is really responding to this interest and this need from the market side. And for example, we are now panelizing straw panels so we can get more straw into more projects. And both so we've got more capacity to touch more buildings, and so we can get straw into buildings that otherwise would not be able to work with straw because they don't have a custom straw builder in their community or within their region. And I'm seeing the sort of the popularization of prefabricated building solutions as being one really big disruptive technology that's allowing a lot of sort of low toxic and carbon storing and biogenic materials to enter into the building space that otherwise would be more prohibitive if it was all custom construction, because now we're relying on a trades pool that may not be fully our trades pool is still depleted from the last decade, again, let alone skilled up to embrace some of these newer technologies or new materials or whatnot. So I see there's some industry shifts happening there, and then very much on the policy side. I mean, I just came from a conference where they were looking at the development of particularly embodied carbon policy. And just to define it, it's essentially the climate impact of the development of building materials, from mining raw materials out of the ground all the way through its disposal lifespan. And there is now policies in dozens of states and municipalities, as well as money that's coming through the IRA to support transparency and data transparency and verification around the carbon footprint of building materials, so on and so forth. So like from the top down, that's exploding as well, because what we're seeing is to hit our near-term climate impact reduction goals for policymakers, we can't do it with operational energy alone. The savings are incremental year over year, and we need to make major reductions in the next 10 to 20 years, and most of those emissions are coming from materials. So it's, working with straw is, I would say, from all of my research, the most effective mechanism of storing carbon, so negative emissions, so banking atmospheric carbon into a building, is through straw and agricultural residue. So there's a total correlation between this like sort of macro industry sort of policy level of trying to like draw down emissions, and they're like, hey, we can do that just capturing straw that otherwise decomposing goes to the atmosphere and turn that into a high performance building insulation material. So not what I was expecting. I've been presenting around the use of biogenic materials and agricultural residues in the built environment in some rooms that I never would have expected 5-10 years ago would be the least bit interested, but now completely aligns with, again, whether it's its potential within prefabrication or whether it's alignment with carbon reduction goals, or for more conservative communities, whether it's an interest in investing in the agricultural sector and investing in local and regional industry. I mean, that's, even if your political or sort of social imperatives don't align with like ecological do-goodism, like investing in regional agriculture is something that almost everybody can feel, pretty darn good about. So yeah, from individual homeowners all the way up to the federal government, we're really seeing a whole lot of drive around the solution stack represented in natural building materials.
I want to take a quick opportunity before we continue this episode to talk about the work we are doing at Latitude Regenerative Real Estate. We see real estate as a catalyst for regeneration where we can change the way that we inhabit the planet. The hard part, though, is that real estate is complex and it requires specialized knowledge in areas around design and planning, capital and investment, and community engagement and construction. That's why at Latitude, our work goes to serve those that seek to create legacy projects that strengthen communities and develop ecological resilience. If you are needing help putting together a project like this and could use an experienced and dynamic development and sales team, we hope that you'll reach out to us at chooselatitude.com. Okay, let's get back into the episode. Let me touch on a silo that I see coming out of the natural building world, which is around cross-laminated timber as one bucket, another being hempcrete, and then another being straw.
Yep.
you've been talking a lot about the straw bale side, but equally, I find people that are like all in. They're like, CLT is the way that we're going to get out of this. And then other people are like, hempcrete is the natural building way to get out of this mess that we're in. How do you see those three different silos? And maybe I'm missing some, but certainly those are the big ones that enter into my periphery and vision of where the industry's at.
Yeah, I think you're bang on in terms of those. From like the biologic materials, I think those are the big three that I see out there that are scaling up to like kind of larger market attention. I think there's a few others on the earth side of things, and the geo side. There's some great folks doing compressed earth block construction and things like that. But yes, I think silos is a pretty decent way of describing it, because champions within those communities tend to believe so passionately about their technology that like this is the technology. That gives me a great opportunity to clarify that I really believe in straw, but I do not believe that straw is the answer to all things. I think it is one of a host of really good applicable technologies or solutions. I use it because it's the most accessible, and it works really well in our bioregion based on grain production, based on our climate, and then based on the skill set and sort of the architectural style that we were entering into when we started working with it. I also love CLT and I love hemp, and I just happen to not work with them quite so directly. So I really appreciate you calling out the fact that they do tend to be a bit siloed. I think that all of these technologies are necessary. And I think what will serve all of us well is to have really good, clear, honest understandings of the advantages and disadvantages and sort of the optimization potential for each of these technologies. Some of them can work well together. Some of them work better in this application or better in that application. Like CLT, I'm going to pick on CLT, not because it's CLT, but because it's wood and gives a good counterpoint to straw. I was talking about how I'm going to frame this more explicitly around carbon, but it by extension relates to biodiversity and other ecological impact categories as well, water toxicity, so on. So straw has some massive potential liabilities in being a commodified industrialized crop. And so depending on like the quality of the agricultural practice, like that could be really great or pretty awful, but at least it's a residue product. So it's being created regardless. And then the question is, can we sort of take some of that residue and rather than seeing, go into mulch or bedding, or in some cases actually like forcefully decompose, can we appropriate into a better building material? And really the sort of orientation there is, rather than trying to find materials to sort of match our dream material profile, can we see what materials are already out there that are appropriate and then make materials from that? So that was really the roots of straw bale construction. CLT is really interesting in that it's coming from wood. And getting anything from a forest ecosystem gets really complicated. It can be the best of times or it can be the worst of times, again, depending on the basis from which that timber is propagated and harvested. There's a version of this where everybody turns to CLT and all of these steel and concrete frames all turn into like primarily wood construction, and we deforest North America. And then there's a version of this in which that gives a really critical injection into sustainable forest management practices. And in my neck of the woods in the Northeast, the greatest threat to woodland ecology is not from the timber industry, because the timber industry here really went downhill a few decades ago. Right now, it's due to development. So investing in regional lumber in my neck of the woods is a sort of working landscape conservation model that's incredibly valuable. Like, yes, Northeast regional CLT, that's awesome, but it's really different than if we were getting that wood from Southern Yellow Pine Plantation or from the Pacific Northwest, let alone the complexity of making sure that the wood that you got from that sustainable forest is actually the same wood that ends up on your job site, which when you get into the timber industry, can be a little more complicated to figure that out. While the manufacturing side is not as broadly distributed, because there's just only so many CLT or mass timber manufacturers, then sort of transportation emissions need to be taken into consideration and whatnot as well. I think it's an incredibly, incredibly valuable and I would say critical structural solution, particularly for mid-rise construction. I mean, low-rise construction, we've already been building with, light wood frame construction for a really long time. So that's pretty easy. But as soon as you migrate past that, it's a really important tool in the belt. but it's not a panacea. And there are these other really complex issues around forest ecology and land management and transportation and aligning with the forestry sector and data transparency and chain of custody visibility, and all of that just needs to be like brought along as well. And I think you could make many of the same arguments, around straw and industrialized agriculture. Same with hemp and the development of the hemp industry and how is that done in a just and ecologically sensitive manner. Seeing it's on the cannabis side of that, like it's not awesome. Like there's some really like harmful and destructive cannabis cultivation practices out there. And so if those conversations aren't happening and that pushback isn't there, it runs the risk of really having those technologies be co-opted and churned through the same machinery that creates that tension that you mentioned around sort of the real estate industry writ large. So I appreciate you sort of referencing it as a silo and like pushing like, oh, what about these different things? Like they all have their strengths, they all have their weaknesses, and the more transparent we can be about it, as these industries are all developing, then there are opportunities to really sort of set some good bases of expectation and some guardrails or ground rules or appropriate investments in those technologies so that we are mitigating the worst impacts of deforestation and chemical proliferation agriculture, so on and so forth, and really amplifying their opportunities for being really good non-toxic carbon storing, sort of biodiversity supporting land-based resources.
You mentioned investing in there, and I'm curious what your perspective is on the investment landscape around developing these technologies, particularly straw, because I see a lot of Europeans that are, let's call it a decade or so in front of the United States in terms of having those top-down policies that have helped to mature their marketplace. But I see that a lot going into CLT building styles. What's going on in the straw world, or like what is really even needed to further develop that building technology?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will own that I'm a little bit naive around the whole investment and business side of the world, particularly at scale, although I'm getting caught up quickly because it's all moving very, very quick. So I'm going to kind of answer that from a couple of angles. On the one hand, in terms of what the industry needs, we are at a point now where we have proven concepts in the sort of viability of straw as a high performance building installation solution in our region. We've been doing it for my house now 25 years. We've got testing data. We've got people living happily in homes. That part is clear. However, to be able to get to that next level of scale, which is, again, beyond the true believers, beyond idiosyncratic, like building level testing regimes, but now more of a product, we need a lot more material testing done on straw, and particularly in panelized straw, because it's through the prefabrication process that it's now moving from a custom service on a building scale to a manufactured product on more of a like an industry scale. And so to that end, there's a lot of investment just in like validating like our value and density curves for straw as a building material, let alone like a whole host of material of like moisture performance testing, not just in situ in a given building, but like what the material performance characteristics are of straw, let alone of a panelized system, of which there's a half dozen various flavors. And then there's fire. And so for us, we're seeing a barrier to entry into the marketplace for mid-rise urban construction, which pretty much, not by the letter, but by practice, requires a UL or CE stamp on a product for fire rating to be able to be easily and predictably implemented into like mid-rise residential construction. And that's tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of testing on a specific composed product. And so the companies that are interested in doing this work are not starting from that basis of multi-million dollar R&D budgets. So investment into the sectors of the industry that are coming by this, I would say, from a more of a mission driven perspective. Those are me and my colleagues that like have a social ecological imperative, see it as a solution to ecological and social problems, as opposed to seeing it as a business opportunity within a building material portfolio. It's unsurprisingly not a ton of investment or large amounts of financial largesse within that community. So figuring out how we can get the investment resources to be able to overcome some of those, not even, I mean, I guess they're technological hurdles, but mostly in the form of documentation so that they can play in the same sandbox as materials that are coming out of these larger industrial sectors. That's one part of the answer to the question. The other way I'd frame that is sort of the opportunity that we have as a building industry to invest in our partner industries of forestry and agriculture. And where I get really pumped is looking at the like billions of dollars of materials that the building sector consumes. Like, we are a massive consumer and therefore a massive investor in technologies and in other enterprises. And for us to be able to invest in regenerative agricultural systems that otherwise are having a really hard time competing in the sort of the commodity food markets and trying to like compete against, monocultural, like massive scale farms. If we can provide a market and invest in those enterprises by getting products for value added building insulation materials, or even just raw materials for, MDF boards and press boards and flooring and, composite framing materials and 1,000 different finish materials, like, I see the investment opportunity from the building sector partnering with our regenerative and sustainable forestry and agricultural sectors as being huge. And Lord knows the demand is there. And so we see ourselves as sort of moving from the service sector within the building industry into the products manufacturing sector as being a conduit of being able to funnel the investment dollars that every single project is throwing and consuming all these materials, and trying to funnel that into, in our case, an organic farm within our region. And we can see that multiplying out in scale. I feel like we are on the verge. You're asking specifically around straw, which is the supply chain that I'm the most familiar with, kind of maybe equal to wood. And we are just on the verge now of having like really formal conversations with the regenerative farming community and figuring out like, hey, we are a growing market here. Like, are there relationships to be fostered? Are there things that we should know? Is there data transparency that we can collaborate on so that we can really prove out, some of the environmental or social benefits of working with this type of agriculture, and really sort of help to support investment across industries that way. So I see it, the investment question, kind of on those two sides. And there's probably 7 other sides as well that we could explore too.
No, I'm like looking for the heart button or the like button on this, because I'm like, yes, we need to underscore this right now, because I'll go to, like, people will ask me, why are you going to this regenerative agriculture conference? And it's like, because there's something here. Not only was it the entry point of like, this is localized organic agriculture is the way in which you have a healthy population as well as a more humane economy, but it blows my mind to go to a regenerative agriculture conference where there are farmers and producers that think that it is crazy to have regeneration whenever you're talking about the built environment. That for some of them, regeneration is the act of managing animals and moving them quickly over a landscape, and that is the regenerative technology.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a limited perspective. And I'm going to go out and really call out the investment industry in the regenerative agriculture space to say that as they're putting hundreds of millions of dollars into CPG, so consumer product goods, they're trying to figure out, how do we replace like this Cheeto bag of monoculture, industrialized agriculture, and make it a regenerative bag of Cheetos. And we are overlooking this huge opportunity to say, what is the direct through line to the way that we're producing housing, just as much as the way that we're producing food?
Yeah.
And this just lights me up. Is like, if we need to talk about the scale of investment, because that's where a lot of these investment firms that we're talking with is like, we just need enough dollars to go into this investment to make it worth it on our end. And that's why even in the agriculture space, they're going towards processing facilities for chestnuts or something really large. It's got like a $20 million price tag on it.
Right.
And it's like, Jacob, you just identified exactly like, hey, there's big price tags on this that need to get investment in, and it'll open up an entire industry. And I think push that along further so that whenever we're going out and talking with developers that want to do a master plan community and they're trying to figure out where builders come from, now the natural building technologies can actually enter into that conversation where I don't see them fitting into the conversation at all right now. It's like a big it's like magnets with the same polarity of like, they just dispel each other, detract. And that's what it's like. I'm not trying to tell all natural builders to go be production builders, but we've got to move this needle further from a custom home built from natural materials of people that can really afford it to, okay, let's crest more into the early adopter, dare say mainstream market at some point in the near future.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. You framed that just so well. I mean, it's funny, just harkening back to earlier in the conversation, talking about this like DIY, some anti-establishment roots of the natural building community. I'm like, yeah, there's some reasons that are not technologically rooted as to why these materials have not scaled up. There's actually been like an overt like disinterest in seeing, this co-option of technology by industry. And I get that. I appreciate that. And also it's inherently self-limited. It's only going to be niche custom craft, and the problems we're trying to solve are systems level problems. We need to scale out these solutions to that broader system boundary. And that's where, I think about the potential for straw. I mean, I think hemp has actually demonstrated this really well, where, hempcrete is maybe the most like direct application in the building technology from the plant, where after the decortication is done and these are stripped out of the fibers, you're taking the herds at the core of the plant and mixing it with a binder and putting it into forms. Folks like Hempitecture have evolved that to create, and Natrafiber have both evolved that to create drop-in replacements for insulation vats. So that's the next level of manufacturing investment and R&D development to, mature the technology to something that's more heavily manufactured, but can directly and immediately replace a more of a conventional building product. And I see the exact same potential with straw. And actually, that potential has been realized. There was a plant, Cal Plant 1, that was producing straw-based MDF boards. Super unsexy material, but like ubiquitous. I mean, they're like, MDF is like everywhere, right? And so being able to do that with an ag residue product, again, a little more investment in manufacturing. It's not just taking a bale and literally putting it into a building, which is what we've been doing for a while. We're now doing a little more than that to panelize it, but only a little bit. There's, between the MDF board, there's a company, Savic, that's doing prefab panels, and they're shredding the straw and blowing it in. So now we have something that's a replacement for, say, cellulose or wood fiber blown insulation. There's a company, Planted, that is in development right now for an OSB replacement product, basically an OSB sheathing product that's grown from a perennial grass. That's a purpose grown as opposed to a residual material. And so just a couple of those little pieces, I'm like, oh my Lord, there's just such an incredible amount of like market potential and product diversity coming from plant-based materials. Just that has already been proven, that now it just needs to have enough of a market development, enough investment and capitalization to be able to just make it a little more secure for some of those startups to be able to mature. And like, it's not a technological problem at this point. I mean, there's always some problems, but that's not the liability. That's not the weak link right now. And I feel like we're just barely scratching the surface of the potential of bio-based, plant-based, carbon-storing building materials to have just this huge raft of replacements, particularly for plastic materials. I mean, I think that's like, if we're looking at, immediate returns on investment and applicability into the market and whatnot, short of like massive market transformation and like economic structural transformations, which like you could argue is part of what's necessary for a truly regenerative economy. And like, I would probably join that argument, but that's not the conversation we're having like right now. Right now is, what does the transition look like, and how do we start to shift the current structure of economy and sort of material production? And a lot of that's going to look like replacement of existing technologies and working within existing market structures. And I see, a whole lot of really strong conventional players arguing against the proliferation of plastics. And I look at a lot of the liabilities just in performance of those materials from a moisture standpoint or a fire standpoint, a durability standpoint, like plant-based alternatives to that, like we can roll those out like yesterday and are actually rolling those out in real time. So when we're looking at some of those opportunities from an investment standpoint, like we can start right there and do like a phenomenal amount of good in terms of how those investment dollars are both mitigating the harms within the built environment and maximizing the opportunities in the agricultural sector. Again, whether it's more value add to residues from existing agricultural facilities or generating new purpose-grown materials. Like it's a total win-win without having to like dismantle capitalism and completely restructure how we finance housing in America. And like, yes, those things also, if it's appropriate in that conversation, but we don't even need to go there to have really significant transformation of the material impact and investment opportunities.
I love this, Jacob. I think that this is like the frontier
Yes.
of the industry. And I mean, if you look back at even what I was reading several years ago, it was like, look at those early natural building publications, the Builders of the Pacific Coast, Mother Earth News. I mean, you can even trace it back to like the Whole Earth catalog with Stuart Brand. And now to pick up books on natural building where you've got like Chris Magwood, that is like the most technical writing that you can imagine. Like that's a dense book that Chris just published. I can't remember the name, but like this is not easy bedtime reading. Like it is on the cusp of like, here is the performance metrics, here is the data that's going into it. And I think that's really needed to create these new opportunities. And so, Jacob, I had a lot of fun having this conversation. There's so many more ways that we could continue on it. I think the next thing that would be so fun is to have, you and a CLT and a hempcrete expert kind of sit on a panel and
100%.
And just watch the nuance that comes out of that and watch where these silos and the tensions as well as the overlapping areas on this like larger Venn diagram is. But I want to give a plug on where people can follow along with your work. You're also doing some really interesting things that I wrote multiple questions down around the corporate structure that New Frameworks has around being a cooperative. So really leading on that regenerative business front that I don't think that we have time to get into today. You're also doing like ADU kits, which I think is a really interesting way around affordable home access. And then getting into, panelization of straw bale material. And so it's like, wow, there's a lot going on here that I would love to figure out, like, what is the best way for people to, even if they're not in the Northeast, where they can have a customer relationship with you? Like, what are the ways in which people can follow along to see how you're continuously pushing this industry along?
Thanks for the question. And before I forget, Build Beyond Zero was the book that Chris just wrote. So just want to make sure I got that in there too. Props to Chris. But in terms of following our work, I mean, certainly our website, we just revamped our website. You can see all those different offerings that you're mentioning. It was a really big deal for us to actually put down the practice of custom residential home construction because we realized it was unaffordable to our own cooperative members and many of our community members. And we were just not able to meet the demands of the housing crisis. So we pivoted to panelization and our prefabricated ADUs and small houses as part of that process. So yeah, happy to talk more about that in the future. But in the meantime, folks can check out our website. We have a lot more information about that. Our Instagram account is pretty active. New Frameworks, you'll find us. That's a great way to learn more. We're also co-conveners of the Northeast Bio-Based Materials Collective. So if you look up, it's a little bit of a mouthful, but Northeast Bio-Based Materials Collective, if you look that up, we've co-convened with Mass Design Group and Half Design Studio, trying on a regional basis to coordinate folks that are trying to push bio-based materials more into the mainstream in light of everything we were just talking about. I'm also doing a lot of work with a group, Builders for Climate Action, which is actually a group that Chris Magwood founded, since we're name dropping him. One of the things that we've done, in addition to a whole lot of research and education, we also have a tool called the BEAM tool, BEAM, and that is a material carbon estimator. So it looks at the carbon impact of building materials. And I draw people's attention to that partially because it's a very tangible way of getting to understand more of the sort of the climate side of the work of biomaterials. And all of the products we talked about, CLT, hemp, sheep's wool, straw, cork, bamboo, eelgrass, I could keep going. Like all these different like market-ready bio-based material solutions are all in that tool. And we designed the tool. It's a free tool that you can download from buildersforclimateaction.org. And that will give like even a layperson can navigate through that tool. It's designed by builders for builders, people that are not spending their lives in front of, laptops that really just need like a good visual access for information. And that's just a great way to orient around like what materials are out there and what's even like, what could I even work with, and what's some sense of scale of the benefit of working with these materials. And if you start kind of getting into that world, like that's a very, very, very deep pool that can get super technical or, super kind of ecological and more on that side of things. And there's a thousand different rivulets to follow that stream. So yeah, just a handful of places to start there.
So fun. Jacob, the last question I have for you is like, who, outside of the custom home building or even the ADU side of things, like that is very much a homeowner customer avatar. I'm curious around who that new customer is as you're making this this shift in business model. Is it a developer? Is it CDFI? Like, who is the right interface that you're really looking for with a panelized solution to help get this work out into different projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the next market would have to be, I would say, the like multifamily developer. Because I feel like, for a couple of reasons. One, I feel like there is a good match between the scale of production and the manufacturing for straw insulated panels, or not even just straw insulated. We're one of a handful of straw panel manufacturers amongst a broader pool of bio-based insulation panel manufacturers. And so there's a really good match in production scale to housing scale in the multifamily sector. It also, it kind of makes that leap of sort of making it less like personalized and idiosyncratic and something that is a little more generalized housing typology, where it may very well be that the vast majority of people that ever have any relationship with that building have zero idea that it's straw on the walls, and that is fine. Like that is exactly where we need to be, that it's no longer like a special unicorn that we're like eager to like feed and protect, but that we're now in a unicorn breeding program so that they're no longer, maybe they're just horses at that point. I'm not sure. The analogy is falling down, but you get the idea that it becomes more scaled and normalized, that we get our basic building components from plants, and that it isn't like this special thing that we need to like make a truth window of so that everyone can see and celebrate. I love that. And I feel like that was and still is important, just to bring viability and visibility to the material as being relevant. But like, we know it's relevant now. I've been doing this myself for a quarter century in some of the most challenging environments in North America. Like, we got this. It's no longer special. It can just be another insulation form. Can we just scale this up and get this just out into the world? And I think the economy of scale is about right in the sort of developer-led multifamily project as a precursor to more like institutional construction and these broader and larger forms of panelized construction, and more sort of R&D and manufacturer intensive products like finished board products and some of these other, like the next level of manufacturing intensive things that may be a little bit more ubiquitous, like what Planted's doing with OSB sheeting, where at that point, like, it's just another product on the shelf, and it just happens to be like a totally awesome product, where the buy-in there is going to be from developers that are trying to support better ESG reporting profiles. And like, that's the market drive around that. But it's like at par in cost and in performance and everything else. And no one is going to be, like looking at the sheathing board on their wall, that kind of a thing. And so that's where I think, that's the sort of the trajectory that I would like to see this go, knowing that there will always be an opportunity to do something even cooler and more bespoke and more unique. Like, I don't think we need to worry about like, oh no, we're going to lose cool eco-sensitive products. Like, nope, we'll always be able to innovate some other cool new eco-sexy thing. Can we just take these basic things and make them ubiquitous at this point? And I think developer-led multifamily right now, and I say that because that's also the direction I see it coming. Those are the customers that we're hearing more and more from. And again, until we get our fire testing certification on our panels, we're having a hard time being able to meet. And so that's like the next immediate frontier for the market base that I'm seeing kind of firsthand and seeing my peers kind of working with as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. And for any multifamily developers out there, reach out to Jacob. I think that would be a really fun combination. Yeah, it's just so impressive to see what's coming out of the Northeast in terms of this conversation. Like, y'all have such an incredible ecosystem there. I mean, in the Pacific Northwest where I am, I thought that we were a little bit ahead of the curve. But then whenever you see the real powerhouses out of the natural building movement and the stronghold in New England is just kind of mind-blowing. And I'll put New Frameworks right at the top of that list. So Jacob, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll certainly have to do it again.
Thank you, Neil.
Okay, that is a wrap. Thank you for tuning into the show today. If you got any value out of this conversation, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss future episodes. I can honestly say that these conversations have changed my life, my business, and how I steward my own home. If you want to learn more about our work at Latitude, where we partner with property owners, developers, and stewards to create thriving communities and resilient habitats, then you can find us online at chooselatitude.com. Also, if you have a project that you are needing help bringing to life or would like to align your investment portfolio with profitable investment opportunities that benefit communities and the environment, then you can reach out to me directly at neil@chooselatitude.com, and we can start a conversation from there. Okay, that's it. Until next time, here's a friendly reminder that the water we drink falls from the heavens. The air we breathe comes from the beautiful symbiotic relationship we have with plants. The food that nourishes our bodies come from the ground we so cavalierly pave over, and that we all have a role to play to regenerate this planet.